82 meters down, off the coast of Thailand. The sonar image doesn't make sense at first. Too symmetrical, too long. Then the ROV's lights catch it. A conning tower, collapsed inward like a crushed can, resting in the silt. The USS Grenadier, scuttled in 1943, found after 76 years. The divers expected wreckage, scattered debris, maybe some twisted metal, and empty torpedo tubes picked clean by decades of current. What they found was damage telling a story. Bombing scars, blast-shattered sections, the kind of violence frozen in rust. But also something else. Details that didn't quite match the official account. Questions the wreck raises just by being there. No one's opened certain sections. No one's allowed to disturb much. But the question's already out there, spreading through naval history circles like a slow leak. What else went down with the Grenadier that day in 1943? The wreck was found in 2020 by a team of private technical divers using side-scan sonar in the Strait of Malacca, roughly 6 degrees north latitude, 100 degrees east longitude. Warm, murky water, thick with silt. World War II submarines face constant degradation from tropical conditions and biological activity. The discovery wasn't accidental. The team had spent months cross-referencing declassified U.S. Navy War Patrol reports with modern hydrographic charts, hunting for depth anomalies and seabed signatures that matched Tambor-class dimensions. They knew the general area where Grenadier went down. The crew's survival and capture had been documented, coordinates estimated from Japanese records and post-war debriefs. But 76 years of currents, shifting sediment, and incomplete navigation data from 1943 meant the actual wreck could be anywhere in a 5-square-mile box. When the sonar finally pinged back a 307-foot silhouette lying perpendicular to the current, they knew. The dimensions matched. The location was close enough. But what sealed it was the shape, that distinctive Tambor-class profile with the long, slender hull and the raised deck gun platform aft. The ROV went down first. What it found at 270 feet was a wreck showing exactly the kind of damage you'd expect from aerial bombing and deliberate scuttling. The conning tower had imploded inward, its periscope shears bent and twisted from blast concussion. The aft deck gun mount, a 3-inch 50 caliber, had been sheared completely off, consistent with direct hits from Japanese bombers. Blast scoring ran down the port side aft, black streaks frozen in rust. The hull showed the typical degradation of 77 years in warm tropical waters. Corrosion, biofouling, sections weakened by time and pressure. But it was identifiable, recognizable. The forward sections, while damaged, retained enough structural integrity to show what she'd been. Torpedo tubes were visible through silt clouds, their outer doors in various states of damage and decay, the kind of condition consistent with bombing, scuttling, and decades underwater. The divers documented everything methodically, knowing they were looking at one of the war's documented losses finally relocated after 3/4 of a century. The divers took measurements, shot video, and surfaced. Within days, the footage was circulating among naval historians, W4 researchers, and submarine veterans groups. Within weeks, the U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command had confirmed the wreck's identity through hull number markings and structural comparison with archived builders' plans. The site became a focus of historical interest and protection discussions. Most scuttled submarines from the Pacific War show catastrophic damage, shredded by depth charges, crushed by pressure beyond test depth, or torn apart by illegal salvage operations that stripped them for scrap metal. The Grenadier's condition was consistent with the known circumstances of her loss: aerial bombing followed by deliberate scuttling. But here's what makes the find significant. The crew's account could now be matched against physical evidence. And sometimes, physical evidence raises questions that testimonies, filed under combat stress and captivity, couldn't fully answer. The approximate location where the wreck was found aligns with the crew's reports from 1943, accounting for the inherent imprecision of wartime navigation. Dead reckoning, celestial fixes when the sky was clear, and best guess estimates when you were being bombed. The crew abandoned ship in chaos, swam for rafts, and watched their boat sink from a distance while Japanese planes circled overhead. The coordinates they gave during their POW debriefs were approximations. The depth estimates were visual, watching the conning tower disappear and estimating based on what they could see. Finding the wreck at 270 feet in the general area described doesn't contradict the historical record. It confirms it within the margins of error inherent to 1943 navigation technology. But some details of the sinking, preserved in different accounts and now visible in the wreck's condition, don't quite align in ways that matter. April 22, 1943, 0900 hours local time. The USS Grenadier was 72 hours into her 6th war patrol, hunting Japanese convoys in the Strait of Malacca, one of the most dangerous choke points in the Pacific theater, when a Japanese spotter plane caught her on the surface, recharging batteries in broad daylight. Declassified war patrol reports, filed by Commander John A. Fitzgerald after his release from a Japanese POW camp in 1945, lay out the timeline with the kind of precision submariners drilled into muscle memory. The Grenadier had departed Fremantle on April 10th, topped off with fuel, 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, provisions for 60 days, and a full crew of 76 officers and enlisted men. Her orders: patrol the Malacca Strait, interdict Japanese supply lines running between Singapore and Rangoon, and engage targets of opportunity. By April 20, she'd already expended 16 torpedoes targeting oil tankers and troop transports. Most missed. Some hit but didn't detonate, a chronic failure of early war American torpedoes that submariners bitterly called duds. The Mark 14 had a faulty magnetic exploder that either detonated prematurely or not at all, and a contact exploder that crumpled on impact instead of triggering. It was a known problem, reported up the chain repeatedly, but BUORD, the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, refused to believe their weapons were defective. Submariners were dying because of it. Morale on the Grenadier was low. They'd been at sea for 12 days, living in a steel tube that reeked of diesel, sweat, and fear, and they had almost nothing to show for it. Fuel was tight. The crew was running on coffee, adrenaline, and the grim knowledge that every day in the Malacca Strait was a day closer to getting caught. On the morning of April 22nd, Fitzgerald brought the boat to the surface to recharge the massive lead-acid batteries that powered the electric motors for submerged running. It was a gamble, surfacing in daylight, in enemy-controlled waters, with Japanese air patrols operating out of Singapore and Penang. But the batteries were nearly dead, and without them, the Grenadier couldn't dive, couldn't maneuver, couldn't fight. So Fitzgerald took the risk. At 09:14, the forward lookout spotted the plane, a single-engine spotter circling at low altitude. Within minutes, 2 bombers were inbound, already lined up for their attack runs. Fitzgerald ordered a crash dive. The klaxon sounded, hatches slammed shut, the chief of the boat yanked the vents, and ballast tanks began flooding. But the boat was heavy, batteries low, and the dive was agonizingly slow. Tambor-class subs weren't known for quick dives even in ideal conditions. They were fleet boats, built for surface speed and endurance, not agility. The first bomb hit aft, punching through the thin deck plating and detonating in the engine room. The explosion ruptured fuel lines, shattered the main diesel, and sent a geyser of seawater flooding into the maneuvering compartment where the electricians controlled the motors. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Lights went out. The boat lurched, stern down, taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. The second bomb hit port side amidships, a near miss that detonated just off the hull. The shockwave jammed the dive planes, split a ballast tank, and cracked welds in the pressure hull. Seawater began streaming in through a dozen hairline fractures. Fitzgerald knew the boat was finished. He surfaced to save the crew. 76 men abandoned ship, swimming for life rafts as the Grenadier wallowed, stern low and flooding. The captain ordered scuttling charges set and ballast tanks opened. Standard protocol required destruction of all sensitive material. Codebooks, charts, cipher machines, anything that could give the Japanese an intelligence advantage. Fitzgerald's post-war debrief describes a rapid, chaotic abandonment. The boat was dying. The crew followed protocol, destroyed classified materials as trained, and evacuated. The scuttling charges were set. The submarine went down. But the physical wreck, examined 76 years later, shows damage patterns that raise questions about the final minutes. Standard scuttling procedure involved setting small explosive charges to ensure the boat couldn't be salvaged, opening ballast tanks to flood the hull, and destroying crypto equipment and classified documents. This was drilled into every submariner. If capture was imminent, make sure nothing useful survived. Fitzgerald's account confirms this happened. Codebooks went over the side in weighted bags. The ECM cipher machine was smashed. Charts were destroyed. The crew evacuated in under 4 minutes from the moment the order was given. The wreck shows evidence consistent with this: blast damage from bombing, structural failure from flooding, and the general destruction you'd expect from a combat loss followed by scuttling. But some details visible on the wreck suggest the final moments may have been more complex than a straightforward scuttle and abandon. The physical damage carved into the Grenadier's hull tells the story written in Fitzgerald's reports, but with details that only rust and time can preserve. Start aft, where the bombers hit. The deck gun mount is gone, sheared clean off at the base, exactly consistent with aerial bombing and the kind of blast forces that twist metal like foil. The mounting platform is scarred, blackened with oxidized blast residue still visible under decades of biofouling. The conning tower, the submarine's command center when surfaced, is imploded. The pressure-resistant plating, designed to withstand depth-charge concussion, buckled inward from the shockwave of a bomb that detonated close enough to crush, but not penetrate. The engine room, visible through a jagged hull breach caused by the direct hit, is a frozen catastrophe. Diesel engines are toppled off their mounts, piping is shredded, and the maneuvering compartment beyond is a compressed tangle of electrical panels and fractured control wheels. This is where the fatal damage occurred. The flooding here was instantaneous, the damage irreversible. That's the story the patrol reports tell. Damage sustained. Boat lost to enemy action. Crew survives. Archived and filed under combat loss. The forward sections show the expected signs of deliberate scuttling, evidence of flooding, structural damage consistent with both bombing and intentional sinking. The torpedo tubes are in various states of damage and corrosion. 76 years of saltwater doing what saltwater does to steel and brass. But, looking at the overall layout, comparing the wreck to builders' plans, questions emerge about what else might have been modified during the boat's operational life. Field modifications were common during the war. Submarines operating out of forward bases like Fremantle sometimes had equipment upgraded, systems reconfigured, or minor structural changes made to support evolving mission requirements. Not all of these modifications made it into the permanent engineering files, especially for boats that were lost before comprehensive refit documentation could be completed and archived. The challenge is that many WWII submarine engineering records are incomplete. Decades of archive transfers, records management changes, and the sheer volume of wartime documentation mean gaps exist. For boats that were lost in combat, the documentation is often thinner, based on what was filed before the final patrol and what could be reconstructed from crew debriefs after the war. For the Grenadier, some sections of her engineering file from early 1943 show the kind of incompleteness common to boats operating out of forward bases under wartime conditions. Whether those gaps represent lost paperwork, routine modifications that weren't prioritized for documentation, or something else, is unknowable without the records themselves. What's certain is that the wreck exists, showing the damage consistent with her known fate and raising the kinds of questions that all rediscovered wrecks raise. What else was happening that didn't make it into the official account? Submarines in the Pacific Theater did more than hunt convoys. Some carried intelligence officers. Some transported captured materials, extracted personnel from occupied territory, or supported covert operations that stayed classified for decades. It's documented. Declassified files from boats like USS Nautilus and USS Argonaut confirm it happened. Whether the Grenadier had any such tasking is unknown. Her patrol reports describe standard interdiction missions. Her crew's post-war accounts describe combat, capture, and survival. There's no smoking gun in the declassified record suggesting covert operations. But the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially for operations designed to leave no paper trail. The wreck, lying at 270 feet in the Strait of Malacca, is protected under international maritime law and U.S. regulations governing sunken military vessels. While no crew died aboard, making it technically not a war grave in the strictest sense, it's treated with the respect due to any naval loss. A vessel that served, fought, and was lost in combat. Access is limited. Disturbance is discouraged. The focus is on documentation, preservation, and honoring the memory of those who served. When the discovery was publicly announced in 2020, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Families of the 76 survivors, most of whom had died in the decades since the war, expressed relief and gratitude. The Grenadier had been a ghost for some of them, a boat their fathers and grandfathers had served on, survived, and then often refused to discuss. Several children and grandchildren of POWs gave interviews to outlets like CBS News and the New York Times. They described the discovery as a chance to finally visualize what their relatives had lived through: the boat, the attack, the sinking, the swim to the rafts, while Japanese planes circled overhead. One grandson said seeing the footage felt like meeting a part of his grandfather he'd never known. None of them mentioned classified missions or hidden cargo. If the crew knew of anything beyond their standard patrol orders, they didn't share it. Not with their families, not in reunions, not in the oral histories recorded decades later. Which raises a simple question. If there were secrets, did the crew even know about them? Submarine operations compartmentalized information. The captain and senior officers knew the full mission profile. The crew knew their jobs. If cargo was aboard that wasn't on the manifest, if passengers traveled who weren't on the crew list, if equipment was installed that served purposes beyond standard patrol operations, most of the crew might never have known. That was operational security. Need to know. Standard practice. So the men who survived, who spent years in Japanese POW camps and came home to rebuild their lives, might have had nothing to tell because they were never told anything beyond patrol the Malacca Strait and sink Japanese shipping. The boat might have carried secrets they never knew existed. The Grenadier matters because it's part of the larger story of submarine warfare in the Pacific, brutal, hidden, and far more complex than the simplified narratives of heroes and victories. It was a war of attrition fought in silence, where boats disappeared, crews vanished, and the truth often stayed classified longer than the men who lived it. The wreck is a data point, one submarine, one loss, one crew that survived when so many others didn't. It's worth remembering, worth studying, worth protecting, but it's also worth questioning. Not out of disrespect, but because history demands it, because the gaps in the record, the missing files, the incomplete documentation, all suggest that what we know is not all there was. The families of the crew deserve the full story. Researchers deserve access to complete records. The public deserves transparency about what their government did, even 80 years ago. Especially 80 years ago, because that's when the decisions were made that shape the world we live in now. And the wreck deserves more than silence. It deserves investigation, documentation, and honest answers to the questions it raises just by being there. The Navy says the Grenadier is a relic of sacrifice and service, a monument to the men who served aboard her and survived against the odds. That's true. But monuments are supposed to tell the whole story, not just the parts that fit the narrative. This one sits at 270 feet, wrapped in rust and coral, guarded by regulations and time. It's honored, it's protected, but it's also incomplete, a story with missing pages that may never be recovered. And that, more than anything, is what the wreck of the USS Grenadier really represents. Not just what we know, but what we'll never know, and the questions that remain unanswered because the only witnesses are steel and silence.